Stop. She's not dead. Destiny Williams, 34 years old, knocked over the funeral wreath and sprinted toward the mahogany casket being lowered into the ground. 500 mourners in black designer suits stood frozen in shock. Richard Blackwood, the eldest son, shouted for security. But Destiny had already reached the casket, her fingers clawing at the lid, her voice raw with desperation. "Call an ambulance, she's still breathing." The priest stumbled backward. Security guards rushed forward, and then Destiny threw open the lid, pressed her hand against Eleanor Blackwood's chest, and felt what no one else had bothered to check a heartbeat. Faint, barely perceptible, but unmistakably there. The 72-year-old woman who had been declared dead 3 days ago, who had been embalmed and dressed and eulogized and mourned, was still alive. The scream that erupted from the crowd was like nothing Destiny had ever heard. It wasn't grief. They had already processed their grief over 3 days of visitations and memorial services. It was something more primal, the horror of watching a woman they had come to bury suddenly revealed to be alive. Some people fainted. Others ran. A few pulled out their phones, recording footage that would be viewed 50 million times within 24 hours. But Destiny didn't notice any of it. She was focused entirely on Eleanor, on the faint rise and fall of her chest, on the bluish tint of her skin, on the smell that clung to her like a ghost. Orchids. She smelled like orchids. It was that smell that had made Destiny run. That smell that had triggered a memory buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. That smell that had transported her back 30 years to a funeral just like this one, to a casket, just like this one, to a mother who had been declared dead, just like this one. May Williams had smelled like orchids too on the day they buried her. 4-year-old Destiny had leaned into the casket to kiss her mother goodbye, and she had smelled that sweet floral scent, so different from the lavender soap May always used, so strange and foreign on her mother's cold skin. She had asked her grandmother about it, but Grandma had just shushed her and pulled her away. "Don't think about it, baby. Mama's gone to heaven now." But Mama hadn't gone to heaven. Destiny knew that now with a certainty that turned her blood to ice. Mama had gone into the ground, into the darkness, into a box that was nailed shut and buried 6 feet deep. And somewhere in that darkness, Mama had woken up. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after Destiny's discovery. Paramedics pushed through the crowd of shocked mourners, their equipment clattering, their voices sharp with urgency. They hooked Eleanor up to monitors, started IVs, checked vitals that shouldn't exist in a woman who had been legally dead for 3 days. And as they worked, their faces grew increasingly pale. "She's alive," the lead paramedic said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pulse is weak, maybe 30 beats per minute, but she's alive. How is this possible? The death certificate was signed. She was embalmed. How is she still—" "She wasn't embalmed." Destiny's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Check her blood. Someone gave her something, a drug, a poison, something that made her appear dead without actually killing her. The embalming was faked. The whole thing was faked." The paramedic stared at her. "How do you know that?" Destiny looked at Eleanor's face, so peaceful, so still, so much like her mother's face had looked 30 years ago. "Because this isn't the first time someone in this family has been buried alive." Eleanor Blackwood was not just wealthy. She was iconic, a self-made billionaire who had built Blackwood Beauty from nothing, transforming a small cosmetics company into a global empire worth $12 billion. Her rags-to-riches story had been featured in countless magazines and documentaries. She had started as a factory worker in a lipstick plant, mixing colors for minimum wage, dreaming of something more. By 30, she owned the factory. By 40, she owned the industry. By 50, she was on the cover of Forbes, hailed as one of the most successful businesswomen in American history. But success had come with a price. Eleanor's first marriage had ended in divorce when her husband couldn't handle being overshadowed by his wife's achievements. Her second marriage had ended in tragedy when her husband died in a car accident that some whispered wasn't entirely accidental. Her 3 children, Richard, Catherine, and Marcus, had grown up in the shadow of her brilliance, alternately resentful and desperate for her approval. None of them had inherited her drive or her talent. Richard ran the company adequately but without vision. Catherine had fled to Paris to escape her mother's expectations. Marcus had pursued a career as an artist, funding his failures with advances on his inheritance. Eleanor had loved them all in her way. But she had also seen their weaknesses, their entitlements, their inability to build anything on their own. And in recent months, she had begun to wonder if leaving them her fortune was the kindest thing she could do, or the cruelest. The answer had come to her 6 months ago when she had attended a charity gala and met a young woman named Destiny Williams. The name had struck her like a lightning bolt. Williams. The same name as May Williams, her housekeeper from 30 years ago, the woman who had saved her life in the fire of 1992, who had pulled her from the flames and carried her to safety, who had suffered third-degree burns across half her body and never once complained. May had died shortly after the fire, supposedly from complications related to her injuries. Eleanor had grieved for her, had paid for her funeral, had set up a small trust fund for her daughter. But she had always felt that it wasn't enough, that nothing could ever be enough to repay what May had sacrificed. And now, May's daughter was standing in front of her 30 years later working as a maid for a catering company, serving champagne to people who would never know her name. Destiny didn't recognize Eleanor. Why would she? She had been only 4 years old when her mother died. But Eleanor recognized her immediately. The same warm brown eyes, the same proud bearing, the same quiet dignity that May had carried like a crown, no matter how menial the work, no matter how cruel the treatment. Eleanor had hired her on the spot, not as a caterer, but as a personal assistant, a position that came with a generous salary, full benefits, and the opportunity to finish the college degree Destiny had been forced to abandon when her grandmother got sick. It was, Eleanor told herself simply, good business. Destiny was smart, capable, and hardworking. She deserved a chance. But it was more than that, and Eleanor knew it. Hiring Destiny was a way of honoring May's memory, a way of repaying, however inadequately, the debt she had owed for 30 years, a way of making sure that May's sacrifice had not been in vain. What Eleanor didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that hiring Destiny Williams would save her life. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors tracking Eleanor's vital signs. She had been unconscious for 6 days now, 3 days of death, followed by 3 days of medically induced coma, while doctors worked to flush the poison from her system. The toxicology report had confirmed what Destiny suspected. Eleanor had been given a rare compound called tetrodotoxin mixed with a synthetic sedative, a combination that slowed the heart and respiration to nearly undetectable levels while keeping the victim alive. It was the same compound used by practitioners of voodoo in Haiti to create zombies, people who appeared dead but could be revived if the antidote was administered in time. Without the antidote, the effects would wear off naturally within 5 to 7 days. If Eleanor had been buried as planned, she would have woken up in her casket approximately 4 days after the funeral. She would have found herself in complete darkness, surrounded by satin and mahogany, with 6 feet of dirt above her and no way to call for help. She would have died slowly, painfully of suffocation, fully conscious, fully aware, fully alone. Destiny sat beside her bed, holding her hand, waiting for her to wake up. She hadn't left the hospital since the ambulance brought them here. She had given statements to the police, answered questions from detectives, told her story so many times that the words had begun to lose meaning. But she couldn't leave, not until Eleanor opened her eyes, not until she knew for certain that she hadn't failed again. The door opened and Detective Sarah Chen walked in, her expression grim. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, the kind of detective who had seen too much to be shocked by anything. But even she had been shaken by this case. "We got the lab results back," Chen said, sitting in the chair across from Destiny. "The compound in her system matches what we found in the perfume bottle, custom synthesis, not something you can buy online. We're tracking the source now, but it's going to take time." She paused, her eyes searching Destiny's face. "There's something else. Something I need to ask you about." Destiny knew what was coming, had been dreading it since the moment she smelled the orchids on Eleanor's skin. "My mother," Chen nodded. "I pulled the file on May Williams. Died June 15, 1994, supposedly from complications related to burn injuries sustained in a fire. She was buried in Greenwood Cemetery 3 days after her death." The detective's voice was carefully neutral. "You told my officers that you believe your mother was also poisoned, that you believe she was buried alive." "I know she was." Destiny's voice cracked. "I was 4 years old, but I remember. I remember the smell. Orchids. My mother never wore orchid perfume. She was allergic to most fragrances, only used unscented soap. But at her funeral, she smelled like orchids. The same smell that was on Mrs. Blackwood." Chen was quiet for a long moment. "We'd need to exhume the body to confirm. That requires a court order, which requires evidence. Right now, all we have is a 30-year-old memory from a 4-year-old child." "Then get the court order." Destiny's eyes were hard, determined. "Dig up my mother's grave. You'll find what you need." "And what will we find?" Destiny closed her eyes, and the memory rose up like a wave, her mother's face in the casket. So peaceful, so still. The smell of orchids, the sound of dirt hitting the coffin lid. "You'll find scratch marks on the inside of the coffin. You'll find broken fingernails embedded in the wood. You'll find evidence that my mother woke up after she was buried and died trying to claw her way out." The exhumation happened 2 weeks later on a gray October morning that seemed fitting for the grim work ahead. Destiny stood at the edge of the gravesite, wrapped in a black coat, watching the excavation equipment tear into earth that had been undisturbed for 30 years. Beside her stood Detective Chen, a forensic team, and to everyone's surprise, Eleanor Blackwood herself. Eleanor had woken from her coma 5 days after being rushed to the hospital. Her recovery had been slow but steady, aided by the fact that she was, as her doctors put it, too stubborn to stay unconscious. She had demanded to know everything: who had poisoned her, how they had done it, and why Destiny had known to stop the funeral. When Destiny told her about May, about the orchids, about the suspicion that had haunted her for 30 years, Eleanor had insisted on being present for the exhumation. "May saved my life," she said, her voice still weak, but her eyes fierce. "If someone murdered her, I want to know. I want to see justice done." The excavation took 3 hours. The coffin emerged from the earth. In remarkably good condition, the seals had held, protecting the contents from water and decay. But it was what they found inside that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. The forensic team opened the coffin with clinical precision, their cameras documenting every detail. And there, preserved by the sealed environment, was the evidence Destiny had predicted: deep scratches gouged into the satin lining extending down to the wood beneath. Broken fingernails embedded in the coffin lid. And on May Williams's face, frozen in death for 30 years, an expression of pure terror. She woke up. The forensic examiner's voice was hushed with horror. "Based on the damage, I'd estimate she was conscious for at least 2 hours before she suffocated. The scratch patterns suggest she was trying to find a weak point in the coffin somewhere she could break through. She didn't give up until the very end." Destiny fell to her knees. For 30 years, she had carried a vague, shapeless grief. The grief of a child who lost her mother too young, who grew up with questions that had no answers. But now that grief had a shape, and it was monstrous. Her mother hadn't died peacefully. Her mother had died in the worst way imaginable, alone in the dark, screaming for help that never came. Eleanor knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around the younger woman. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have asked more questions. May died because someone wanted to keep her quiet, and I was too consumed by my own grief to see the truth." "Who?" Destiny's voice was raw with pain. "Who would do this? My mother never hurt anyone. She saved your life. Why would someone want her dead?" Eleanor's face hardened. "Because of me. Because of what I was going to do." She helped Destiny to her feet, her eyes distant with memory. "In 1994, I was planning to change my will. May had saved my life in the fire, and I wanted to make sure she and her daughter were taken care of. I was going to leave her a significant portion of my estate, enough to ensure that she would never have to work again, that you would have every opportunity in life." She paused, her jaw tightening. "I told my children about my plans a week before May died. I thought they would understand. May was like family to me. She deserved to be treated like family." Her voice grew bitter. "But my children didn't see it that way. They saw a threat to their inheritance. A maid who was about to take money that they believed was rightfully theirs." Detective Chen stepped forward, her notebook already out. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you suggesting that one of your children murdered May Williams?" "I'm not suggesting anything, I'm stating a fact." Eleanor's voice was cold as ice. "And I'm stating another fact: whoever killed May also tried to kill me. The same method, the same poison, the same orchid perfume to mask the smell, 30 years apart, but the same killer. You think one of your children tried to murder you? I know one of them did." Eleanor turned to face the detective, her eyes burning with a fury that 30 years of success had never extinguished. "And I intend to find out which one." The investigation moved quickly after the exhumation. Detective Chen's team obtained warrants for financial records, phone records, and travel histories for all 3 Blackwood children. They interviewed staff members, reviewed security footage, and traced the source of the tetrodotoxin compound. And piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. Richard Blackwood, the eldest son, had been in Singapore on business when his mother collapsed. His alibi was airtight, multiple witnesses' hotel records, even a live television appearance could confirm his whereabouts. He was ruled out within the first week. Marcus Blackwood, the youngest, had been at his studio in Brooklyn working on a sculpture for an upcoming exhibition. His alibi was weaker, only his girlfriend could vouch for his whereabouts, but his financial records showed no suspicious transactions, and his temperament, while erratic, had never shown signs of violence. He remained a person of interest, but not a primary suspect. That left Catherine Blackwood. Catherine had returned from Paris 3 weeks before her mother's death, supposedly to reconcile after years of estrangement. She had stayed in the family mansion, had helped plan the charity gala, had spent long hours with Eleanor discussing the future of Blackwood Beauty. To outside observers, it looked like a daughter reconnecting with her mother. To the detectives investigating the case, it looked like something else entirely. "She had access to Eleanor's food and drink," Chen explained to Destiny and Eleanor during a briefing at the hospital. "She knew her mother's schedule, her routines, her medical history, and 3 weeks is plenty of time to administer a slow-acting poison without arousing suspicion." "But what about the perfume?" Destiny asked. "The orchid scent that I smelled on both my mother and Mrs. Blackwood, where did that come from?" Chen pulled out a photograph, an evidence bag containing a small crystal bottle filled with amber liquid. "We found this in Catherine's room at the mansion. Custom perfume supposedly commissioned from a boutique in Paris. The lab analysis found traces of tetrodotoxin mixed into the fragrance. Catherine was applying it to her mother's skin directly, ostensibly as a gift, a bonding ritual between mother and daughter. In reality, she was slowly poisoning her one application at a time." Eleanor stared at the photograph, her face unreadable. "Catherine gave me that perfume 2 weeks before I collapsed. She said it was from a little shop in the Marais, that she had it made especially for me. I wore it every day. I thought," her voice broke, "I thought it meant she loved me." "There's more." Chen's expression grew grimmer. "We traced the source of the compound. It was synthesized by a chemist named Dr. Henri Valois, who operates out of Marseille. He's known to law enforcement as a supplier of exotic poisons for high-end clients, people who want their victims to die without leaving obvious traces. She pulled out another document, a financial record, showing a wire transfer of $200,000 from an account in the Cayman Islands to Dr. Valois' Swiss bank account. This payment was made 6 weeks ago. The account belongs to a shell company registered in Catherine's name. Eleanor closed her eyes. Of all her children, Catherine had always been the most difficult to read, the most ambitious, the most resentful of her mother's success and her own failures to replicate it. But this, murder, attempted murder. The deliberate, calculated killing of her own mother and the woman who had saved her mother's life. There's one more thing. Chen's voice was hesitant now, as if she wasn't sure how to deliver the next piece of news. When we searched Catherine's computer, we found a file, a document she had been working on for several months. It was a revised version of your will, Mrs. Blackwood, a forgery that would have left the entire Blackwood estate to Catherine alone, cutting out her brothers entirely. But I never signed any new will. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. My current will divides the estate equally among all 3 children. That's just it. Chen set down another photograph, this one showing a signature clearly Eleanor Blackwood's distinctive handwriting. She didn't need you to sign it. She had your signature forged. The plan was to discover this new will after your death, present it to probate court, and claim that you had changed your wishes shortly before dying. By the time anyone could challenge it, she would already have control of the company. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Catherine hadn't just wanted her mother dead. She had wanted everything: the company, the fortune, the legacy that Eleanor had spent 50 years building. And she had been willing to murder anyone who stood in her way. What about May? Destiny's voice was barely audible. Why did Catherine kill my mother 30 years ago? Chen exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who nodded slowly. Because of the original will. The one Eleanor was planning to sign in 1994, leaving a significant portion of her estate to May Williams and her daughter. Eleanor took over, her voice heavy with guilt. After the fire, I told my children that I was going to add May to my will. I wanted them to understand how much she meant to me, how much I owed her. Catherine was 17 at the time, old enough to understand what it meant, old enough to resent it. She paused. I always wondered why she became so distant after that. Why she moved to Paris, why she refused to come home for holidays, why she looked at me with such coldness whenever we were together. I thought it was just typical teenage rebellion. I never imagined. She was 17 when she killed my mother. Destiny's voice rose with disbelief. A teenager committed murder to protect her inheritance. The evidence suggests she had help. Chen pulled out one final document, a photograph of an elderly man with cold eyes and a thin smile. Dr. Alexander Mercer, the Blackwood family physician for over 40 years. He signed May Williams's death certificate in 1994, attributing her death to complications from burn injuries. He also signed Eleanor's death certificate 3 weeks ago, attributing her death to natural causes related to advanced age. Mercer. Eleanor's voice was flat with betrayal. He's been my doctor since I was 40 years old. He delivered Catherine. He treated every illness, every injury, every health scare I ever had. And he was helping her murder me the whole time. We believe Catherine recruited him 30 years ago when she first learned about the changed will. Mercer was in debt at the time, gambling problems, expensive habits. Catherine offered him money in exchange for his cooperation. He's been on her payroll ever since, ready to provide false death certificates whenever she needed one. The arrest happened the next morning. Catherine Blackwood was taken into custody at JFK Airport, where she had been attempting to board a flight to Geneva. She didn't resist, didn't protest, didn't say a single word as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She simply stared at the officers with the cold reptilian calm of someone who had always known this day might come and had made peace with it long ago. Dr. Mercer was arrested at his home in Connecticut, where officers found a safe containing detailed records of his 30-year arrangement with Catherine. He was more cooperative than his employer, eager to make a deal to trade information for a reduced sentence. His testimony would eventually fill in the gaps of the prosecution's case, providing a complete picture of Catherine's crimes. The trial lasted 4 months. Catherine was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder May Williams and the attempted murder of Eleanor Blackwood, conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, fraud, and a dozen lesser charges. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, forensic analysis, Dr. Mercer's testimony, and the physical evidence from May Williams' exhumed coffin. Catherine's defense team attempted to argue diminished capacity, that she had been psychologically damaged by growing up in her mother's shadow, that she had acted out of desperation rather than malice. The jury wasn't convinced. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Eleanor sat in the front row of the courtroom, her face expressionless. She had aged 10 years in the past 6 months, her hair gone white, her shoulders stooped with a weight that had nothing to do with her recent illness. Destiny sat beside her, holding her hand, providing the same silent support that Eleanor had provided during the exhumation of May's grave. After the verdict, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions, demanding statements. Eleanor ignored them all. She walked out of the courthouse, got into her car, and didn't say a word until they were miles away from the crowds and cameras. I created her. Her voice was barely audible. I was so focused on building my empire, on proving myself to the world, that I didn't see what was happening to my own daughter. I didn't see the resentment growing, the entitlement, the capacity for cruelty. I thought giving her money and opportunities would be enough. I didn't realize that what she needed was a mother. Destiny didn't respond immediately. She had spent the past 6 months processing her own grief, the discovery that her mother had been murdered, that she had died in the most horrific way imaginable, that her killer had walked free for 30 years while Destiny grew up an orphan. There were no words that could make any of it better. No comfort that could undo the damage that had been done. But there was something else. Something that had been growing between them throughout the trial, throughout the investigation, throughout the long nights when they sat together and talked about May and Eleanor's friendship, about the fire that had bound their families together, about the twisted path that had led them to this moment. "You're not responsible for what she did." Destiny's voice was soft but firm. "Catherine made her own choices. She killed my mother. She tried to kill you. That's not your fault. That's her fault. But if I had been a better mother—" "My mother was a wonderful mother." Destiny cut her off gently. "She loved me more than anything in the world. She worked herself to exhaustion to provide for me, and she never once complained. And none of that stopped Catherine from murdering her." She took Eleanor's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Some people are just broken, Eleanor. Some people can't be saved no matter how much love you give them. The question isn't what you did wrong. The question is what you do now." Eleanor looked at her, this young woman who had lost everything because of the Blackwood family's dysfunction, who had every reason to hate Eleanor and everything she represented. Instead, she had saved Eleanor's life, had fought for justice for her mother, had stood beside Eleanor through the worst months of her long life. "What do you think I should do?" Eleanor asked. Destiny smiled, the same warm, generous smile that May Williams used to wear, the smile that Eleanor had never forgotten in 30 years. "I think you should live. I think you should use your money and your power to do some good in the world. I think you should honor my mother's memory by being the person she believed you could be." She paused, her smile fading into something more serious. "And I think you should let me help you, not as your employee or your charity case, as your partner. As the daughter of the woman who saved your life and as someone who might have the same chance to make a difference. Eleanor stared at her for a long moment, and then for the first time since the nightmare began, she smiled. May would be proud of you. She would be so proud of the woman you've become. I know. Destiny's eyes glistened with tears, and I hope that she's at peace now, knowing that the truth finally came out, knowing that her death finally meant something. It meant everything. Eleanor pulled Destiny into an embrace, holding her tightly. It meant everything. The changes came quickly after the trial. Eleanor rewrote her will this time with safeguards that no one could forge or manipulate. Richard and Marcus each received 10% of the estate, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to enable the kind of entitled idleness that had characterized their lives thus far. The remaining 80% was divided between the May Williams Foundation, dedicated to supporting domestic workers and their families, and a new charitable trust that would fund scholarships, housing assistance, and job training programs for women in poverty. Destiny was named executor of the will and chair of the foundation. But more than that, she was officially adopted by Eleanor, a legal formality that both women knew was more symbolic than practical, but that meant everything nonetheless. Eleanor had lost a daughter to her own ambition and blindness. Destiny had lost a mother to that same daughter's cruelty. Neither could undo the past. But they could build something new together. Blackwood Beauty was restructured as a public benefit corporation with a mandate to prioritize ethical sourcing, fair labor practices, and environmental sustainability. Destiny joined the board of directors, bringing a perspective that had been sorely missing from the company's leadership, the perspective of someone who had actually worked for a living, who understood what it meant to struggle, who knew that true success was measured not by profit margins, but by the lives you improved along the way. May Williams's grave was relocated to a private cemetery on the Blackwood estate, marked by a memorial that Eleanor commissioned from a renowned sculptor. The monument depicted two women standing side by side, one pulling the other from flames, both looking toward a future they would never share. The inscription read, May Williams, 1960 to 1994. She walked through fire to save a stranger. She died in darkness, because evil feared the light. Her courage lives on in the daughter she raised, and the lives her sacrifice continues to touch. May she finally rest in the peace she was denied. Eleanor visited the grave every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers, talking to May as if she could still hear. She told her about the foundation, about Destiny's accomplishments, about the small daily victories and setbacks of a life that was finally being lived with purpose. She told her about the guilt that still haunted her, the what-ifs and if-onlys that kept her awake at night. And she told her over and over again the words she had never been able to say while May was alive. Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a second chance, and thank you for giving me your daughter who saved me all over again. 3 years after the trial, Eleanor Blackwood passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 75. This time there was no suspicion of foul play, no need for autopsies or toxicology reports. She had simply reached the end of a life that had been longer and more eventful than most, and she had gone gently into whatever came next. Her funeral was held on a sunny October morning, attended by over 2,000 people, employees, business partners, charity beneficiaries, and friends from every stage of her remarkable life. Destiny delivered the eulogy, speaking about Eleanor's legacy, her transformation, and the lessons she had learned in the final years of her life. Eleanor Blackwood spent 50 years building an empire. Destiny said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. She accumulated wealth and power beyond most people's imagination. But in the end, she told me that none of it mattered as much as the relationships she had neglected, the people she had overlooked, the love she had failed to give and receive. She paused, looking out at the crowd. My mother saved Eleanor's life 30 years ago. She pulled her from a burning building and carried her to safety, sacrificing her own health in the process. And then she was murdered, killed by someone who saw her as a threat to their inheritance, rather than as a human being worthy of dignity and respect. Her voice grew stronger. Eleanor spent the last 3 years of her life trying to atone for that. Not because she was responsible for my mother's death, she wasn't, but because she understood that her silence, her willful blindness, had contributed to a culture of cruelty and entitlement that made such crimes possible. She couldn't bring my mother back, but she could honor her memory. She could create something beautiful out of something terrible. She could prove that redemption is possible even when the sins of the past seem unforgivable. Destiny held up a small crystal bottle, not the orchid perfume that had been used as a weapon, but a new fragrance that Blackwood Beauty had created in May Williams' honor. It was called Sunrise, and its scent was warm and bright and full of hope. This was Eleanor's final gift to my mother and to me, a perfume that represents not endings, but beginnings, not death, but life. Not the darkness of a sealed coffin, but the light of a new day. She opened the bottle and let the scent drift across the crowd. Every time someone wears this fragrance, they'll be carrying a piece of my mother's courage and Eleanor's redemption. They'll be part of a story that began with tragedy, but ended with something better. She set the bottle down and picked up a handful of dirt from beside the grave. Eleanor asked to be buried beside my mother. She said they had unfinished business, a friendship that had been cut short, a debt that had never been repaid. I like to think that wherever they are now, they're together. 2 women who came from nothing and built everything. 2 women who saved each other's lives. 2 women who proved that love is stronger than cruelty, that truth is stronger than lies, and that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. She let the dirt fall onto the coffin, a soft sound that seemed to echo in the silence. Rest in peace, Eleanor. And Mama, I hope you're finally at peace too. I hope you know that I never forgot you. I hope you know that your sacrifice was not in vain. I hope you know that I love you, and I always will. The crowd began to disperse, but Destiny remained at the graveside long after everyone else had gone. She stood between the 2 graves, her mother on one side, Eleanor on the other, and felt for the first time in her life a sense of completion. She had spent 34 years carrying a grief she couldn't name, a loss. She couldn't explain a feeling that something was missing, but never knowing what it was. Now she knew. Her mother had been taken from her not by fate, but by malice. Her mother had died not peacefully, but in terror. Her mother had been silenced so that a spoiled teenager could protect her inheritance, but her mother had also been avenged. The truth had come out. The killer had been punished, and the legacy of May Williams, a woman who had been invisible in life and forgotten in death, would live on through the foundation that bore her name, through the lives it touched, through the daughter who had refused to let her story end in darkness. Destiny reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, the only picture she had of her mother taken when May was young and healthy and full of dreams. She looked at that face so similar to her own and whispered the words she had been waiting 30 years to say, "I found you, Mama. I found out what really happened, and I made them pay." She pressed the photograph to her heart. "You can rest now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The darkness is over." The light finally came. A breeze stirred the flowers on both graves, carrying with it the faint scent of sunrise, warm and bright and full of hope. And Destiny smiled because she knew that somewhere, somehow, her mother and Eleanor were together at last. 2 women who had saved each other. 2 women whose bond had transcended death itself. 2 women whose story would be told for generations to come. Not as a tragedy, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the power of love, the persistence of truth, and the unbreakable strength of those who refuse to let the darkness win.